Takudo was a terminally ill boy who reincarnated into the world of his favorite game after his death, alongside his favorite game character. Together, they decide to build an empire, just like they did in the game. However, neither of them knows that Takudo has been reborn as the legendary King of Ruin, destined to destroy the world to bring about its rebirth. In his previous life, Takudo spent most of his time playing a civilization-building strategy game called Eternal Nations. One day, just as he restarts the game after completing everything, he quietly passes away. As he sinks into darkness, he suddenly opens his eyes to find himself sitting on a stone throne in the middle of a forest. Confused, he wonders what's happening until a familiar figure appears before him. Takudo instantly recognizes the woman as Atao, the sludge witch, his favorite character from Eternal Nations. He recalls that he had challenged himself by playing the game on its hardest difficulty, starting with the Kingdom of Ruin and Evil, known as Manora. Fortunately, that kingdom included Atao, a character initially weak but capable of absorbing the abilities of her defeated enemies to become the strongest by the end. Atao addresses Takudo as her king, leading him to wonder if this is some kind of roleplay. However, Atao reassures him, saying there's no need to overthink things because she already knows everything: his name, his history, and the fact that he was a hardcore player who completed the game on nightmare difficulty with the most challenging civilization. Takudo is stunned that she knows about his status as a player and her existence as a character from the game. She even remembers all their games together, his playstyle, his strategies, and all the times he called out to her through the screen. Overjoyed that he can now speak to his favorite character in person, Takudo asks if this is heaven and whether she summoned him here. But Atao reveals that she herself was summoned to this world and suspects that it resembles Eternal Nations. She then kneels before Takudo, holds his hand, and declares that since they're together, it doesn't matter where they are, they should build a civilization just for themselves once more. Encouraged, Takudo accepts the idea, asking Atao to serve him in creating a glorious civilization. She happily agrees, playfully acting like a badass witch and pledging her loyalty. Both of them laugh awkwardly at their overly dramatic exchange. Takudo then mentions that she already knows the first rule of Manora, to become shut-ins and hide their existence from the world. Next, Takudo uses his emergency skill to summon a giant insect scout to survey the surrounding area. They discuss how secrecy is essential in the early game, and scouts like this help gather intelligence without exposing themselves. Takudo shares that he can view the scout's perspective, just like in the game, but it cost him half his mana to create. Ideally, he would summon a fighter for protection, but his mana is insufficient for that right now. Atao feels disheartened because she's currently too weak to protect herself, let alone her king. As the scout explores, Takudo observes nothing but forest. Atao laments her helplessness, but Takudo assures her that her presence alone is enough, which makes her immensely happy. Suddenly, the scout encounters a group of weary and starving dark elves. Atao sees this as good news, explaining that dark elves are a neutral species, slightly inclined toward neutral evil, and that their kingdom's alignment is also Loki neutral evil. However, this discovery troubles Takudo, who begins to question whether this is truly the world of Eternal Nations. He worries that if another civilization is nearby, his fledgling kingdom might be destroyed quickly. But Atao comforts him, promising that if danger arises, they'll escape together. Takudo agrees and decides to keep monitoring the Dark Elves while continuing his scouting. While they joke around, the group of Dark Elves unexpectedly arrives. Both parties are equally shocked to see each other. Atao prepares to risk her life to protect her master if necessary. The Dark Elves' leader, Gia, was on a mission to find food for his starving people. His assistant had warned him against entering the forest, citing legends about a great evil sealed within. But Gia, determined to save his people, pressed on, only to encounter Takudo and Atao, whom he perceives as avatars of evil. In his eyes, Takudo appears as a shadowy silhouette, confirming the terrifying legends. Fearing for his people, Gia quickly kneels before Takudo and introduces himself, with his followers doing the same. He apologizes for trespassing. Atao puts on a tough front, calling it wise of them to know their place. She bluntly asks why the Dark Elves have come, prompting Gia to hurriedly explain their plight. Atao, growing impatient, urges him to get to the point, intimidating him further. Gia reveals that his clan was unjustly banished by the council and remains persecuted. They were forced into these cursed lands for safety, but their food supply ran out a week ago, and now they are on the brink of starvation. When Takudo asks if they've endured great hardships, Gia freezes with fear, but Atao commands him to answer. He explains that his people only wish to live in peace, yet they suffered greatly, leading them to this desperate situation. Gia wonders whether Takudo will be cruel to them as well, but to his surprise, Takudo throws some apples at him, telling him to try them because they're delicious. Gia has never seen apples before and is hesitant, but his followers lack his patience. They eagerly devour the apples, exclaiming how sweet they are. Then, Takudo suddenly creates some pears, leaving Gia completely stunned. Atao scolds Gia, asking why he isn't eating the fruits that her master has so graciously provided. Bowing before Takudo, Gia explains that many in his tribe are starving, especially the children, and he wishes to feed them first. Moved by pity, Takudo begins summoning a massive amount of food, shocking both Atao and Gia. As a dark elf, Gia had always faced discrimination, with others assuming his people belonged to the dark side. No one had ever shown them such kindness. Overwhelmed, Gia asks who Takudo really is, but Takudo simply tells him to take the food back to his people. Gia and his followers return to their camp, where their tribe finally eats to their heart's content. Yet, Gia chooses not to reveal how he obtained the food. That night, as he sits alone by the campfire, the clan elder, Moltar, approaches. He remarks that the fruits Gia brought were unlike anything he had seen in his long life, more delicious than any fruit before. He questions Gia about their origin, prompting Gia to recount his encounter with a legendary evil being. Moltar is shocked, recognizing the description as that of the King of Ruin mentioned in ancient texts. According to the books, when the world grows overfilled, the King of Ruin will appear to destroy it, allowing for a new beginning. Gia feels Takudo fits this description. Though he admits he couldn't understand much of what Takudo said, he merely picked up hints from Atao's behavior. Skeptical, Moltar asks if Gia offered anything in return for the food. When Gia says no, Moltar warns that no evil being would show mercy without expecting something in exchange. Yet, Gia insists that Takudo showed genuine compassion, which irritates Moltar. However, after some debate, Moltar acknowledges that Gia did his best to provide for their people. He then declares that, as the clan's senior, he will negotiate directly with the Dark King in hopes of securing the peaceful life they've always desired. Meanwhile, Atao scolds Takudo for wasting his mana on creating food when his reserves are low. But when Takudo gently tells her not to be upset because he needs her, she quickly softens and acts tsundere again. The next day, Gia prepares to visit Takudo again. Moltar asks if he is ready to face the king, cautioning that since they've accepted charity from the Dark King, they must be prepared to pay any price demanded. Gia objects, claiming Takudo never mentioned any price, but Moltar retorts that it's natural for evil beings to ask for compensation for their deeds. Nevertheless, he agrees that their survival depends on Takudo, as no other place is safe. Unbeknownst to them, Takudo's insect scout has been monitoring them the entire time. He recalls the scout N, upon learning that the elves are on their way, nervously hopes they'll simply take the food he prepared and leave quietly. Admitting that he struggles to communicate well, he asks Atao to handle the negotiations to maintain the image that the king doesn't speak directly to lesser beings. Soon, Moltar and Gia arrive. The old elf greets Takudo with a formal salutation, thanking him for the food. He asks for the name of their benefactor, and with Takudo's permission, Atao introduces him as the King of Ruin. Both dark elves are shocked, their fears seemingly confirmed. Atao bluntly tells them to take the food and leave, as it won't last long anyway. However, Moltar insists on repaying Takudo's kindness, asking what they can offer in return. Atao scoffs, saying they probably have nothing of value worthy of satisfying her king. When she challenges them on whether they possess anything of worth, Moltar hesitates, ashamed that they have nothing left. Seeing his hesitation, Atao glares menacingly and accuses him of plotting something. Moltar panics and Takudo realizes that the negotiation is spiraling downward. He pulls Atao aside to discuss a new strategy. She gets annoyed, accusing Takudo of being too soft and warning that these losers will become obstacles. She even suggests killing them and placing their heads on pikes around their base, but Takudo rebukes her, joking that she's acting like that one Austrian painter. He argues that the elves just want to coexist peacefully and are offering repayment out of gratitude. Instead of giving them food for free, he proposes they establish a system where the elves pay in a manner they can manage, which would foster a healthier relationship. Though reluctant, Atao concedes and informs the elves that her king has decided to accept their offerings. Seeing the relief on Molter's face, both Takudo and Atao realize he had been extremely nervous because he viewed Takudo as a typical evil being. Atao scolds him for that assumption, but then gets confused about what they should ask in return for the food. Suddenly, Takudo gets an idea and tells her to ask the elves for information about the outside world. Moltar is overjoyed and swears to tell Takudo everything he has seen and heard about the world beyond the forest. Atao then states that once he fulfills this, his tribe must leave the forest immediately, which shocks both Gia and Molter. They plead to stay under Takudo's protection, but Atao warns them not to be greedy if they want to live. Gia tries to argue, but Moltar silences him, insisting they must obey the king's command. As the elves prepare to leave, Takudo feels guilty about driving them away. On a sudden impulse, he stops them and offers Moltar and Gia the chance to become his citizens. Both are stunned, but no one is more shocked than Atao, who demands to know what he's doing. Takudo reminds her of the refugee system from the game, which allows them to incorporate other species as citizens. Since dark elves are neutral aligned, they can adapt to Minora's evil attribute and coexist with other species in the kingdom. Atao remains skeptical, noting that evil-aligned species often fight amongst themselves. But Takudo points out that their main species, the homunculi, are unsettling creatures, human-like beings pieced together poorly, and they can't spend all their time with such eerie beings. As soon as the image of the homunculi flashes in her mind, Atao immediately agrees. Turning to the elves, she explains that Takudo plans to build a kingdom here and is willing to accept them as citizens if they pledge their loyalty. Moltar asks what that entails, and Atao bluntly tells him they'll become evil beings, but assures them it's more fun than they might think. Soon after, Takudo and Atao visit the dark elf settlement, where everyone is terrified of Takudo, some faint just from seeing him. Taking his throne, with Atao at his side, she declares that the dark elves will now be citizens of Manora. She checks with Takudo one last time, and upon his approval, the elves are officially integrated into his kingdom. Atao congratulates them, telling them that their survival and safety are now guaranteed by their king. Gia, however, wonders aloud if that's all, since he doesn't feel any different after becoming an evil being. But the moment he speaks, a surge of hatred wells up inside him, and the others directed toward those who hurt and persecuted their kind. The two normal elves with them watch on in concern. Seeing their struggle, Takudo asks if they are alright. Gia is moved to tears, realizing that someone finally cares for him and his people. The dark elves cheer for Takudo, tears streaming down their faces, while Takudo feels a bit overwhelmed. A few days later, Takudo receives a map of the continent from Molter, and he immediately collapses in despair upon seeing it. Atao asks what's wrong, and he tells her to look. Their starting position is terrible. They are on a continent already occupied by two massive and powerful civilizations: the Holy Kingdom of Qualia, a human nation worshipping the god Arlis, known for their hardcore good alignment, and Elnan, an alliance of elementals and elves devoted to nature, also aligned with the good side. Atao panics, realizing that if either of these civilizations discovers them, they'll be wiped out instantly. She collapses alongside Takudo, but he manages to calm down, reasoning that as long as they remain hidden, they can grow stronger. In the game, their primary species, the homunculi, were too dumb to conduct meaningful research. But with the dark elves on their side, things might improve. Soon, the dark elves visit Takudo again, this time with Gia introducing his assistant, Emily, a knowledgeable and scholarly elf familiar with other kingdoms. Atao praises their dedication and declares that from now on, they'll have important responsibilities, because that's what Takudo wants. First, she appoints Moltar as the head of internal affairs, noting that she has high hopes for him, especially since he knows magic. Then she names Gia the head warrior of Manora, tasking him with building a strong army. Recruitment is left entirely up to him, and Gia eagerly boasts that he'll slay their enemies and display their heads as trophies. Takudo, however, is already grossed out by the idea, prompting Atao to clarify that their king prefers peace. Gia is left baffled. Why would the king of ruin value peace? Moltar teases Gia, claiming that unlike him, he has brains rather than just brawn. This sparks a playful rivalry, with Gia declaring that since he is young and strong, he can work harder without rest. Atao is oblivious to their competition, assuming they're just diligent workers. She asks Takudo whether, they should assign them resource-gathering tasks, and he suggests beautifying the land and constructing homes. Atau relays the orders to Moltar, instructing him to gather timber while preserving most of the forest. Moltar agrees enthusiastically, pointing out that dark elves are natural forest dwellers. Takudo also instructs them to reforest any cleared areas, but the elves are confused by the term. Realizing that their civilization is not advanced enough to understand reforestation, Takudo asks if they know about military magic or the 6 major elements. Moltar admits he only knows the 4 major elements, and Emily says she's never heard of any country using military magic. This surprises Takudo and Atau, making them realize that this world is much more primitive than they initially thought. Though Takudo and Atau find this world primitive, they realize it's actually a good thing. Once they advance their magical technology, they can quickly surpass other nations. Atau explains to the elves that reforesting means growing new trees to replace the ones they cut, and the dark elves admit they do this too. But without magic, it takes time. Atau proudly claims that reforesting uses the 6 major elements to grow trees rapidly, and despite it being a blatant lie, she credits the method to Takudo. She continues praising Takudo, reminding everyone that he created the unique fruits they ate earlier, and casually mentions that grapes are her favorite. Emler agrees with Atau, sharing that she planted some grape seeds, and surprisingly, a few plants have already sprouted. This surprises Takudo, who hadn't expected anything to grow in this environment. But then a thought strikes him. Since he can magically create fruits from earth, perhaps he can create other things as well. Testing this, Takudo conjures a coin and realizes he can produce gunpowder and other scientific materials too. This means he can propel their civilization's advancement far beyond others. Meanwhile, over in the Holy Kingdom of Qualia, trouble is stirring. Saint Selena leads a band of knights to snowy foothills to eliminate monsters threatening nearby villages. When goblins charge at her, she raises her staff and incinerates them with her holy flame, which ascends into the sky and disperses in the clouds. Where the flames scorch the earth, flowers bloom, enchanting the knights. The knight captain explains that Selena's powers not only burn evil, but also create flower fields, which is why they have a strong alliance with the elves. Afterward, Selena advises the cardinal to send paladins southward because she recently foresaw a bad omen regarding the cursed forest. The cardinal refuses, citing that the forest is too far and he needs higher authorization to deploy paladins. Selena threatens to go herself, forcing the cardinal to relent and promise to send the troops he personally commands. Back in Manora, Takudo and Atau focus on developing their territory, beginning with building houses for the Dark Elves. A temporary throne room is already built around Takudo's throne, and he eagerly looks forward to hosting meetings with his key subjects. Soon, Moltar, Gia, and Emil arrive, prompting Atau to suggest holding their first council meeting. Before they begin, Emil presents a gift to Takudo, an outfit that ends up making him look quite feminine. Regardless, Takudo appreciates it, grateful since his old clothes were getting filthy. The elves don't notice any change in his appearance, but they trust Atau when she insists he looks great in it. With formalities done, Atau initiates the council meeting, but Takudo is too busy admiring himself to pay attention. Atau shrugs and decides to proceed, consulting Takudo only when necessary. He's completely fine with that arrangement. The meeting begins with Moltar asking what buildings they should prioritize. Atau responds that food production should come first, then reveals a creepy-looking plant, designated as their primary food source for now. The elves are visibly repulsed and ask what it is, so Atau explains it's the flesh plant, unique to their civilization, capable of producing meat that tastes like human flesh and is highly nutritious. Disturbed, the elves protest that they don't eat humans, but Atau reassures them that the flesh plant is a temporary measure. They'll diversify their food supplies soon. She adds that they also need storage facilities and management sheds. Emily volunteers to handle that task. Atau then shifts focus to research, vital for small nations like theirs to survive and thrive. Moltar asks what they should study, and Atau instructs them to develop magic technology. Takudo is visibly excited, and Moltar, being a mage, vows to impress him. Moltar asks for clarification, so Atau elaborates. They'll research military magic. While conventional magic targets a few enemies at once, military magic can obliterate entire cities and reshape the terrain for tactical advantage. She orders Moltar to gather talented mages among the elves and start immediately. Fired up, Moltar is eager to craft magic that doesn't exist yet. Next, Atao raises the topic of military strategy, which excites Gia since it's his domain. But Takudo immediately intervenes, stating they won't heavily invest in the military just yet. Atao explains that armies are costly to maintain and unproductive during peacetime. Gia counters that their current forces are too weak to defend Takudo, and Moltar agrees, noting that both he and Gia have bounties on their heads, making them targets. Understanding their concerns, Takudo decides to create a hero instead. Atao agrees, explaining that although summoning a hero is expensive, they require no upkeep, ideal for their current situation. The elves are unfamiliar with the concept, so Atao describes heroes as powerful beings who directly serve the king. There are specific conditions for summoning each hero, but she is confident they'll meet them soon. Takudo reflects that mana is the key to everything in this world, and a kingdom gathers mana from its citizens. The happier they are, the more mana is collected. Determined, Takudo vows to make Manora the happiest kingdom on the continent. Meanwhile, back in the Holy Kingdom of Qualia, a junior paladin named Lonius is chosen for the investigation team, heading to the Cursed Forest. A senior paladin named Vertil accompanies Lonius on the expedition, and his favorite pastime is teasing Lonius, who is strict and overly formal. Vertil grumbles that the church is sending an awfully small investigation team, just 2 paladins and a handful of mercenaries. He believes the church should take Selena's prophecy more seriously. Lonius agrees, but admits they have no way of knowing what the higher-ups are thinking. He knows that if the mission succeeds, they'll be handsomely rewarded, but if they fail, all the blame will certainly land on him. Meanwhile, back in Manora, Takudo inspects the progress of his growing civilization. He feels nostalgic, having watched this phase countless times on screen during the game, but now he's experiencing it firsthand. Emily gives him a tour, proudly explaining that dark elves are skilled at building houses on trees. However, construction is slow for now because they're focusing their efforts on cultivating the flesh trees. She adds that the trees are thriving and the storage and management facilities are complete. Emily also reveals that the elves discovered a freshwater spring nearby and are testing if they can draw water from it. As for magic research, Moltar and the other mages are diligently working in the newly established research building. Takudo is pleased, especially to see that the elves, who once looked so exhausted, now appear happy and lively. When he points this out to Emily, she bursts into tears of joy, which flusters Takudo, though she quickly regains her composure and resumes the tour. Next, she takes Takudo and Atao to the flesh tree farm and proudly says that thanks to the tools Takudo provided, their first harvest is expected soon. Then she guides them to the water source, but immediately notices that the atmosphere around the place feels different, dark, and ominous. The water itself has turned black, and Emily is disappointed, assuming it's now unusable. Before Atao can explain, Moltar and Gia arrive to inspect the site. Both agree that the water seems tainted, but Atao confidently takes a sip, declaring it perfectly safe. She then explains that the area has become part of Minora's cursed terrain, a feature that alters the environment. Takudo urges the elves to take a deep breath, and they suddenly feel their minds clearing and their bodies energized. Atao clarifies that cursed terrain benefits beings with an evil alignment and weakens neutral and good beings. Since the dark elves are now evil-aligned, the water is harmless to them. To confirm, Gia drinks it himself and finds no issue. Atao further reveals that soon the entire forest will be absorbed into this terrain. However, Takudo points out a drawback: the ominous appearance of the cursed terrain makes their location too obvious. Moltar agrees, noting that if the whole forest turns dark, enemies will easily discover them. As usual, Gia suggests they form an army, but Atao and Takudo reassure him that summoning a hero is their priority. Moltar, still unclear on what a hero is, prompts Atao to demonstrate. Suddenly, dark tentacles sprout from Atao's back, effortlessly slicing through nearby trees. She reveals that she herself is a hero, and despite having only 1% of her original power, she could still annihilate entire armies. Takudo proudly explains to the amazed elves that heroes grow stronger over time, even without doing anything. He then scolds Atao for cutting down the trees unnecessarily and tells her to clean up the mess later. The elves, however, are thoroughly impressed and declare that a king with such powerful subordinates deserves a grand palace. Though Takudo dismisses the need for a palace, saying it's unnecessary for now, the elves insist they refuse to let their king live in the same houses as them. Atao also supports the idea, adding that building a palace would boost the people's morale. Finally, Takuto agrees, joking that while he'd love to have a flying fortress someday, a regular palace will do for now. Along the way, Veldas compliments Lornias on doing a great job hiring so many mercenaries. Lornias responds that it wasn't easy, especially since most of the mercenaries in the region are currently stationed up north. A sudden appearance of barbarians in the northern provinces has led to widespread village raids, prompting the Saint and her army to be dispatched to deal with the threat. Still, the situation there remains grim. One of the mercenaries comments that he's glad they aren't the ones fighting the barbarians. Another mentions that the pay might be worth the risk, though there are unsettling rumors of a witch being seen in the north, something none of them want to face. Veldas brushes off the concern, reminding them that they're heading to the southern cursed lands, not the north, so there's no reason to worry about the witch. The group later arrives at a nearby town to rest for the night. While eating dinner, Lornias brings up the topic again and questions the mercenary Bargo about the witch rumor. Bargo admits it's just gossip. People say a witch is behind the chaos in the north. Lornias finds that hard to believe, arguing that no single person could cause that much destruction, especially with the Saint on the scene. Bargo agrees that it's probably nonsense, but adds that if a witch is real, she would be incredibly dangerous. He also finds it odd that the kingdom sent 2 holy knights on such short notice to investigate lands like these. He asks Veldas for clarification. If this mission is even remotely similar to fighting a witch, Bargo wants no part of it. Veldas admits he wasn't given specific details, but guesses their assignment has something to do with the Dark Elves, who have recently started populating the forest. He believes the kingdom wants to ensure they're not causing trouble. Still, neither Lornias nor Bargo are fully convinced. To most citizens of the kingdom, Dark Elves are feared as assassins and users of dark magic. Lornias expresses concern that if left alone, the Dark Elves might grow strong enough to pose a threat to the kingdom. He even suggests a bit of light genocide, but Veldas firmly shuts him down, reiterating that this is a reconnaissance mission only. If anything gets dangerous, they will retreat. Bargo is relieved to hear that Veldas is so reasonable, as he has no interest in participating in a massacre. Lornias, however, is baffled by Veldas's refusal to wipe out what he considers an evil race. Bargo reminds him, "You've got a wife and kids. Are you really willing to risk your life in a needless bloodbath? Unlike you, the rest of us want to return home to our families." Reluctantly, Lornias agrees to follow orders. Meanwhile, over in Manora, Takuto gathers all his citizens for something he wants them to witness. Everyone is confused at first. He simply stands next to a pile of meat tree fruit. But then Takuto raises his hand and channels mana into the pile. To everyone's amazement, the fruit transforms into a scout bug right before their eyes. The people are astonished. Takuto has essentially created life with a wave of his hand. Atao proudly declares that this is just a glimpse of what Takuto is truly capable of and urges everyone to continue devoting themselves to him. Later, in the throne room, Takuto is relieved that no one questioned him too closely. He and Atao had just followed the procedure from the game, and even Takuto finds it hard to believe that simply infusing mana into fruit can create life. Now that they've confirmed they can safely produce soldiers, Atao says it's time to move on to the next phase, summoning a hero. It will take some time, as Takuto needs to accumulate enough mana to complete the ritual, but once done, they'll be nearly unstoppable. Atao, clearly excited, asks which hero Takuto plans to summon first. He chooses Isla, the queen of all insects, because she offers the best early game advantages. Isla enhances the power of all insect-type soldiers nearby, making scout bugs incredibly effective in battle. She can also produce larva soldiers, useful for both combat and construction, making her perfect for accelerating Minora's development. Atao praises Takuto for his strategic thinking. Aside from Isla's abilities, she's also the only hero without a problematic personality. The other 2 potential heroes are far more volatile, one obsessed with world domination, and the other with total destruction, both far from ideal for a peaceful lifestyle. Still, Takuto knows he'll need to summon them eventually. He just hopes that when he does, they don't cause any trouble. Back with the Holy Knights and mercenaries, the group suddenly encounters an angry hill giant. Lornias orders everyone to prepare for battle, but before the fighting can begin, Veldas steps forward and calmly tells everyone to stand down. He'll handle it alone. Lornias tries to object, but Veldas tells him it will be faster if he handles the situation alone. They don't have time to waste. Veldas approaches the giant and begins chanting a prayer. Lornias explains to the mercenaries that Veldas is using the secret technique of Quolia, which allows one to imbue their attacks with divine power through prayer. The hill giant attempts to strike with its club, but Veldas effortlessly slices it in half. The strength of divine arts varies from knight to knight, but for high-ranking holy knights like Veldas, the power is comparable to that of a lesser dragon. The giant doesn't stand a chance. After Veldas slays the creature, Lornias praises him, saying that with Veldas on their side, they'll be able to handle anything in the dark forest. But Veldas doesn't look pleased. He replies coldly that they can't assume anything just yet. Back in Manora, Takuto is busy munching on a burger. Atao is a bit concerned. He's been eating nothing but junk food since arriving in this world. She doesn't scold him, but does suggest he start eating healthier. Takuto shrugs it off, saying he spent his previous life in a hospital eating nothing but bland nutritional slop. Now, he just wants to enjoy tasty food. Suddenly, he remembers something important. He asks Atao to summon Gia and Moltar for a meeting afterward. She agrees but asks what the meeting is about. Takuto explains that thanks to the additional scout bug, he has a clearer view of the forest and needs advice from Gia and Moltar on how to proceed. Atao guesses he's referring to the nearby village outside the forest, and Takuto confirms. His concern is that the village is close enough to discover Minora's existence soon. Luckily, the village doesn't appear to belong to the Holy Kingdom of Quolia, so they're likely neutral, which means negotiation might be possible. However, if someone from the kingdom were to show up, that would be a different story. Their arrival would almost certainly mean they're on a mission. Takuto reassures Atao that she's worrying too much since there's no evidence anyone knows they exist yet. Atao jokingly warns that saying things like that is usually the death flag for main characters. Takuto laughs, but abruptly stops when he realizes soldiers actually have arrived. And worse, they're armed. These definitely aren't peaceful visitors. Wanting to avoid unnecessary conflict, Takuto tells Atao to deal with them. He asks her to try diplomacy first, but if that fails, she's free to use any level of violence necessary. Meanwhile, outside the forest, the holy expedition prepares to enter. But before they can proceed, Velda senses something off beyond the tree line and tells everyone to hold back. Moments later, Atao, wearing a cloak, emerges from the forest. Both Veldas and Lornias are surprised to see someone living there. Veldas asks her to identify herself. Atao lies and claims to be a humble dark elf, living peacefully in the woods with her people. Lornias, still obsessed with dark elf extermination, is about to provoke her, but Veldas stops him and changes the topic. He tells Atao that his group is only there to investigate the forest and asks if she would be willing to let them enter. Atao politely declines, saying the dark elves would rather not have their home invaded without cause. Lornias is outraged that a lowly dark elf would deny a request from holy knights. But before he can speak further, Veldas sharply tells him to shut his mouth before he causes real trouble. Though Veldas is already suspicious of Atao, he tries reasoning with her, mentioning a divine revelation from the saint about a great calamity hidden within the forest. Lornias panics. Divine revelations are national secrets, and Veldas just blurted one out to a random woman. He threatens to report Veldas for violating the Holy Order's rules. Unfazed, Veldas tells Lornias to do whatever he wants. Then, turning back to Atao, he again asks if she'll let them through. Atao declines once more, claiming there is nothing evil or dangerous in the forest, though this is a blatant lie. Still, Veldas decides not to argue. He tells the group they're heading back. Veldas isn't naive. He knows Atao is highly suspicious. But he also knows that when a lone cloaked figure confidently confronts an entire expedition, it's best not to pick a fight. This is a tactical retreat. Unfortunately, Lornias doesn't grasp that. Instead, Lornias accuses Veldas of abandoning the mission and declares he's stripping him of command. He orders the mercenaries to follow his lead into the forest. And since Lornias was the one who hired them, they reluctantly comply. Personally, I'd quit on the spot after seeing how shaken Veldas was. But Lornias takes it further and commands the men to seize Atao for defying him. They move in on her, ignoring Veldas's warnings. Despite her efforts to resolve things peacefully, Atao realizes she has no choice left. In the next instant, Lornias wakes up lying in a pool of blood. He's somehow still alive, but the other mercenaries aren't so lucky. Atau has stopped holding back. Veldas shouts for someone to report to the kingdom, but Bargo informs him all the messengers were already taken out by Atau, and the survivors are too slow to escape, especially with her now on the attack. Bargo tells everyone to prepare for battle. They have no other option. The mercenaries launch all their arrows at Atau, but she blocks them effortlessly. She remains completely unharmed. Veldas had hoped to avoid facing someone like her, and Atau is equally frustrated. She tells them plainly that this is all Lornias's fault. She would have let them go if they'd simply left the forest alone. But Lornias had to act righteous, so now she has to kill him. Lornias finally realizes he made a huge mistake. He asks Veldas if he knows what Atau really is. Veldas had suspected from the beginning. He wanted to avoid a confrontation for a reason. Now, seeing her true form, he's certain. Atau is a witch. A witch is a calamity-class monster, officially recognized as a national threat. She's far beyond what mercenaries can handle. Veldas orders everyone to fall back. He and Lornias will deal with her directly. They both charge at Atau and recite their prayers to enhance their attacks. At first, Atau doesn't take them seriously. She effortlessly blocks their strikes and mocks them as weak. However, to her surprise, they manage to cut off 2 of her tentacles. Realizing this won't be as easy as she thought, she deduces that their holy magic grants them bonus damage against her. Veldas believes that if they can sever all her tentacles, she'll be rendered helpless, and Atau definitely doesn't want that to happen. So, Atau takes 2 of the mercenaries hostage, intending to use them as human shields to halt Veldas and Lornias' assault. But Veldas reminds Lornias that if they don't stop Atau here, she might target Quolia next. For the sake of their kingdom, sacrifices must be made. Though reluctant, Lornias agrees. The 2 press forward, slicing through the hostages and Atau's remaining 2 tentacles. Atau is stunned they would kill their comrades so readily, and for a moment it looks like she might actually be in danger. But it was all a ruse. Moments later, several new tentacles erupt from the ground, impaling Veldas multiple times. With his dying breath, he urges Lornias to run. Shortly after, Atau finishes him off with a tentacle strike to the head. Lornias is horrified. He was sure they had destroyed all her tentacles. But while that was true, Atau never said she couldn't grow more. In fact, she could summon as many as she wanted all along. She had simply been toying with them. After witnessing Velda's brutal death, the remaining mercenaries lose all will to fight. Atau clearly isn't planning to spare any of them. Desperate, Lornias orders them to scatter and run, hoping at least one survives to report what happened. The mercenaries drop their weapons and flee. Atau, disinterested in a chase, lets them go, though she sarcastically wishes they had done that from the start to save her the trouble. Lornias stays behind to distract her. He swings his holy sword at her, but is stunned when she blocks it using the very same holy sword technique. How could such an evil being know sacred techniques? Normally, that would be impossible. But when Atau killed Veldas, she absorbed all his experience and sword skills, becoming just as capable as he was. She counters Lornias using Veldas techniques and even praises Veldas as a warrior worthy of elite status. Sadly, he died because Lornias couldn't keep his mouth shut. She taunts Lornias, asking if he ever thought about returning home to his wife and daughter. That catches Lornias off guard. He never mentioned that. That's when it hits him. Atau didn't just take Veldas' skills, she took his memories too. If Atau can absorb memories along with strength, then she will only become more powerful with each kill. She offers to share Veldas' final thoughts before dying. He had been thinking about his men's survival to the very end. A noble man, but she scoffs that Lornias isn't the same. He tries to defend himself by saying the other mercenaries already escaped and would report the incident, so the mission wasn't a total failure. But Atau coldly informs him that all of them are already dead. She may not have chased them herself, but she never said she was alone. She had already ordered the Dark Elves to ensure that no one left alive. The moment the mercenaries fled, they were hunted down and killed. Lornias falls into despair as he realizes he's the last one left. In a final act of desperation, he swings at Atau's head, but she's thoroughly enjoying his despair. She quickly subdues him. Before killing him, she rubs salt in the wound by telling him how things could have gone if he had listened. Everyone would have returned home safely. He would have seen his wife and daughter again. They'd have lived peacefully, never knowing the horrors of the forest. But Lonius chose another path, so now she's going to kill him, then she'll find and kill his family too, using Velda's memories to locate them. Atu smugly says she's petty enough to follow through on her threats. In fact, she might even kill all the villagers Lonius passed through on his way here. As they suffer the most agonizing deaths possible, she plans to make sure they all know it was caused by Paladin Veldis and Lonius. Lonius breaks down and screams, begging Atu not to do it, but she grows bored of tormenting him. Eventually, she ends his life just to shut him up. Once Lonius is dead, Gia approaches Atu to report that he and his men have successfully killed all the fleeing mercenaries. No one will survive to report what happened. Atu thanks him for his good work and asks him to take care of disposing of the bodies as well. Before she leaves, Gia hesitates. There's something he wants to ask. He wants to know if Atu really intends to go through with her plan to slaughter Lonius's family and everyone he ever spoke to. But Atu laughs it off. She says she only said those things to terrify Lonius. She has no intention of committing genocide. That would be far too much work, and she doesn't like to fight unless necessary. That aside, she doesn't have time to chat. She needs to speak to Takuto right away. Before the battle, she overheard Veldis call her a witch, even though she's classified as a hero. He also mentioned something about a witch up north, but Takuto has never heard of a witch class in the game, which makes him suspect that this world differs from the one they know. Takuto already had his suspicions. While most game mechanics remain intact, it's safer to assume that the underlying systems are completely different. Fortunately, not all of the differences are negative. Atu's ability to absorb skills from her victims has improved. Now she can also obtain fragments of their memories. Thanks to this ability, they've learned much about Quolia's current situation from the minds of the investigation squad they wiped out. For now, Quolia seems distracted by the disturbance in the north, so they can't focus fully on Manora. However, the squad's disappearance will surely draw suspicion, and Quolia is bound to take some kind of action. Takuto is aware of that, but reassures Atu that Quolia still doesn't know anything about Manora yet. As long as their leadership isn't completely incompetent, they won't attack right away. Right now, Takuto is far more concerned about the northern disturbance and the witch causing it. Atu tried to extract everything she could from Veldis' memories about witches, but he didn't know much. One thing was clear though, the witch in the north is powerful enough to cause military-scale destruction to the Qualian army by herself. Her name is Arikino. Meanwhile, in the northern territory, Arikino has just destroyed another village. She raises the dead villagers to serve as her undead army and prepares to move on. Takuto knows nothing about Arikino's abilities, but the sheer scale of her destruction, despite being new to the world, leads him to believe she might be an isekai traveler like him and Atu. If that's true, things are about to get even more complicated. Atu asks if they should try to make contact. Given the devastation Arikino has caused, she's probably evil-aligned, so maybe they can get along. But Takuto thinks that's a bad idea. They don't know anything about her personality or motives. Atu is frustrated. Things were finally going well, and now this new threat appears. But Takuto reminds her that Arikino is far to the north and won't be their immediate problem. Still, the presence of a threat like her proves that Manora needs stronger defenses. Takuto plans to create another hero as soon as possible. He had originally intended to choose Aya, but with recent developments, he might need someone more combat-oriented. He also realizes that his strategy of remaining hidden must be reconsidered, especially with unpredictable threats, like this witch emerging. To prepare, he's considering an alliance. Quolia is out of the question after what Atu did to their paladins, but the nation east of the forest is neutral and hasn't interacted with Manora yet. Once the palace is completed, Takuto plans to investigate that nation and assess the possibility of forming diplomatic ties. Meanwhile, in that eastern city, barbarians launch an attack. The city's staff-bearer wipes them out with a bolt of lightning, earning praise from the citizens. But she warns them not to celebrate just yet. They still have a long road ahead. Back in Manora, Atu and Takuto finish their conversation. Before leaving, Atu apologizes. She knows Takuto dislikes unnecessary violence, and she admits she got carried away when dealing with the paladin. But Takuto just stares at her blankly and asks why he would care. Atu is instantly reminded. While Takuto may seem kind, he is, after all, the embodiment of evil. Very little actually disturbs him. Before long, Takuto's palace is finally completed, marking the start of his kingdom's true advancement. He's thrilled. He's always dreamed of having a grand palace. Atu reassures him that one day it will grow so large it could pierce the heavens. However, all this talk about the palace makes Atu realize something important. Despite being king, Takudo still doesn't have a single attendant. It would be strange for a ruler to have no personal servants, so she asks if he has any preferences for one. Takudo, somewhat sheepishly, says he's fine with anyone as long as they're easy to talk to. He admits he's a terrible communicator. In fact, he hasn't had an actual conversation with any of the dark elves since arriving. Atu suspects this is mostly because he appears to them as a mass of negative energy. Regardless, Atu promises she has the perfect plan. Takudo is uneasy about how enthusiastic she is, but decides to see what she comes up with. Without hesitation, Atu summons Gia, Molter, and Emil, ordering them to gather all the young girls in the village because the king desires them. Both Takudo and Gia are stunned by this command. Gia, wanting to give Takudo the benefit of the doubt, asks Atu why she's making such a request. Atu explains, though poorly, that she chose young girls because she thought it would be easier for Takudo to practice speaking with them. But instead of saying it plainly, she boldly declares that Takudo likes young girls, making the situation sound far worse. Alarmed, Takudo quickly stops Atu before she can make things worse, insisting she explain the truth without making him sound like a degenerate. Once Moltar and the others hear the real story, they are relieved to learn that Takudo simply wanted a servant who would be easy to talk to. He suggested children because the kingdom is short on laborers, and he didn't want to take away capable workers from important tasks. Young children who can't contribute much yet seemed like the best option. Impressed by his thoughtfulness, Moltar and the others agree to bring him the children. Takudo looks forward to finally having people to converse with. Unfortunately, there's one major flaw in his plan. He still looks like a walking calamity to normal people. The moment the children see him, they burst into tears. Feeling awful about the whole incident, Atu asks Moltar if there are any children who wouldn't scream at the sight of their king. Sadly, given the circumstances, Moltar can't think of anyone suitable. Gia suddenly speaks up and asks if Takudo has met the twins yet. He admits he hasn't introduced them before because he didn't think they'd be appropriate attendants for a king. To put it bluntly, they have a troubled past, and he worried they might offend Takudo in some way. But given the current lack of options, Takudo tells him to call them in anyway. A few moments later, the twins arrive at the palace, introducing themselves as Kuria and Maria. While Kuria speaks with proper respect, Maria talks to Takudo casually, almost like he's an old friend. Atu can tell at a glance that these two have been through a lot. She asks Kuria about the sores on her body. Kuria explains they were caused by a disease, and Moltar elaborates that she once suffered from a plague. Though cured, the scars remain. Atu then asks what happened to Maria. Kuria hesitates, but finally says her sister went through something very cruel and has never been the same. Before Atu can press further, Maria blurts out, without hesitation, "I ate my mother." This is far worse than Atu imagined. She turns to Moltar for an explanation. He admits it's not something he's proud of, but it was the only way. The Dark Elf tribe will never forget the noble sacrifice their mother made for them. Takudo recalls that when the elves were driven from their home, they had to cross treacherous terrain for a long time. Starvation was inevitable, and sacrifices were made. Being forced to eat her own mother shattered Maria's perception of the world. While the trauma seems to have stripped Maria of fear toward Takudo, Atu isn't sure she'd make a good attendant. But before Atu can voice her doubts, Maria walks right up to Takudo and says he looks white to her, a stark contrast to the embodiment of darkness most people see. Intrigued, Takudo asks if she'd be willing to become his attendant and take care of him. Maria says she'll do her best. Impressed, Takudo appoints her as his servant and even a candidate for leadership in Manora. Atu is astonished. This is the longest conversation Takudo has had with anyone besides her. Still, Kuria remains quiet, so Takudo asks her thoughts. Kuria replies that, as Maria's little sister, it's her duty to always stay by her side. If Maria wants to serve Takudo, then she will too. Pleased, Takudo officially puts them in charge of looking after him. However, Gia and Moltar seem uneasy. After the others leave, Moltar privately tells Takudo that ever since their mother's death, the twins have been completely numb, unable to feel even a shred of emotion. Serving him will come with challenges, but Moltar asks that Takudo treat them with patience until they can heal. Later, Maria and Kuria begin their duties. Problems arise almost immediately. Maria, trying to bring Takudo a glass of water, trips and spills it all over him. Kuria rushes to wipe him down and apologizes, explaining this isn't the first time Maria has done something like this. Takudo reassures them that he isn't upset. A few moments later, Atu enters and is clearly disappointed to see another blunder. She scolds Maria, but Takudo tells her to go easy on the girls. Atu can't stand their constant mistakes. But if Takudo doesn't want to punish them, she has no choice but to let it slide. Atu tells Takudo that he has a meeting to attend, and as his attendants, Maria and Kuria will be required to join him. She warns them to be on their best behavior. The meeting begins shortly after. Emil gives the first report. As head of the construction department, she notes that with the palace completed, they now have many workers available and a surplus of resources in storage. She proposes beginning another project immediately. Takudo and Atu agree and instruct her to start building a clinic as soon as possible. Health and safety, they decide, must be a priority for the people of Manora. Emil accepts the order and promises to begin at once. Since Emil is also responsible for resource collection, she continues with that report. Food and material gathering is going smoothly, and thanks to Takudo's abilities, they have been able to acquire goods the Dark Elves could never produce themselves. However, this process consumes a great deal of his mana. They will eventually need to find other means to obtain these necessities. Relying on emergency production too often isn't sustainable. Takudo tells her it's fine for now, but they must begin prioritizing projects and research that will increase his mana recovery. Atu thanks Emil and calls on Moltar for a magic research update. Moltar proudly announces that he has successfully developed military magic. At present, he is the only one capable of using it, but with training, others could learn as well. There's even a possibility they could harness the ruined mana generated by the palace for powerful spells. Still, since Takudo has no interest in starting wars, such magic may not see much use. For now, Atu orders him to focus on researching the 6 major elements of the magic skill tree, as those will most benefit the nation's growth. Finally, Gia reports on the army status. They currently have 5 scout bugs, which have been mapping uncharted areas of the cursed land. The terrain beyond the forest is mostly open plains, making it risky to explore without being spotted. Given that stealth is one of Manora's top priorities, exploration has been limited. Atu decides that's acceptable, since they already have a complete survey of the forest. She orders Gia to reassign the scouts to routine perimeter patrols. Gia hesitates, concerned about weakening their reconnaissance, but Atu assures him she can handle any threats. Besides, she and Takudo have already decided to create a new hero. Takudo confirms he will be summoning Ella after all and asks if the necessary resources have been gathered. Moltar says the lumber and rations are ready, though the large mana requirement is still an issue. After some debate and compromises, the meeting concludes. Takudo leaves pleased with everyone's dedication. On his way back to the throne room, Maria bumps into him, scattering the meeting documents across the floor. Kuria quickly apologizes on her sister's behalf and kneels to gather the papers, but in the process, they accidentally tear one in half. Expecting him to be angry, they look up nervously, yet Takudo simply tells them not to worry and continues to his throne. Then Maria suddenly asks, "Are you a bad person?" Since his alignment is technically evil, Takudo admits that he is. Maria presses further. If he's a bad person, why hasn't he killed them yet? They've made constant mistakes, errors that, under most rulers, would mean execution, yet he shows them mercy. They simply can't understand why. In response, Takudo asks them what they think the difference is between a good person and a bad person. To Maria, the answer is simple. A good person only does good things, and a bad person only does bad things. However, Takudo tells Maria she's only half right. A good person is indeed someone who must always try to do the right thing. They can't lie, steal, or kill without reason. But a bad person doesn't necessarily have to always do bad things. Bad people are selfish by nature, simply doing whatever they want without regard for others' feelings. In Takudo's case, what he wants is to be kind to them, so there's nothing wrong with being lenient when they make mistakes. Besides, he already knows they've been messing up on purpose in an attempt to make him angry. Maria and Kuria admit that they were hoping he'd eventually lose his temper and kill them because they don't believe they deserve to live after what happened to their mother. Takudo understands why it's hard for them to forgive themselves. though he can't personally relate to their experience. Still, he believes their mother made her sacrifice because she wanted them to survive. He tells them that they are free now, and the best way to honor her memory is to live their lives to the fullest, ensuring her sacrifice wasn't in vain. Moving forward won't be easy, but he promises to stay by their side every step of the way. The two break down in tears at his words and hug him tightly. A few hours later, Atu walks in and finds them both asleep on Takuto's throne. She feels a twinge of jealousy at how close they've grown to him, but she has more pressing matters to discuss. She informs Takuto that the report on the nearby city is complete. The city is called Dronten, part of the multiracial neutral nation known as Foreign. Because Dronten hosts many different races, Takuto believes negotiations with them should be straightforward. Still, he's concerned by the fact that the city was built in such a remote location. Atu explains that the reason is a dragon vein mine, an incredibly valuable resource, as dragon veins naturally produce mana. She recommends securing it as soon as possible. The report also notes that Dronten is currently under attack by barbaric forces, including ogres and goblins, and the city's defenses are faltering. Takuto asks whether Dronten has received aid from its homeland. As far as Atu knows, no reinforcements have been dispatched, so the situation continues to deteriorate. Given the state of the city, Takuto assumes there must already be refugees. Welcoming those refugees into Manora could both boost their population and foster goodwill with Dronten, and in time, they might be able to claim the Dragon Vein Mine for themselves. Takuto orders Ira to prepare an envoy immediately. However, while on their way to the city, Ira's envoy encounters a group of beastkin in the middle of nowhere, and tensions rise quickly. The leader of the beastkin, Tanakapali, is terrified of Ira and her group, as they are shrouded in darkness so dense it can be seen with the naked eye. Despite her fear, Tanakapali tries to keep the situation peaceful, since her subordinates are so frightened that they might lash out, which would surely get them all killed. Because Ira is still under orders to keep the existence of Manora hidden, she prepares to eliminate all witnesses. However, one of the beastkin pipe is too oblivious to recognize the danger. Instead, he casually asks for Ira's name and begins a conversation, an act so bold and foolish that it catches Ira off guard. Surprised, she decides to delay killing them. Eventually, the two groups come to an understanding, and Ira learns that Tanakapali's party is actually an envoy from Dragon. This stroke of luck saves her the trouble of traveling there herself, so she invites Tanakapali and her men to meet the king of Manora. Tanakapali grows increasingly nervous at the thought of meeting a king powerful enough to command someone like Ira. When she finally meets Takuto, her fears intensify, as all she perceives in him is an endless abyss of darkness. She begins to regret her earlier decision to accept the invitation. Before encountering Ira, Tanakapali's group had been attacked by a giant in the barren lands. Pipe, one of the staff bearers, used grass magic to knock the giant down. Unfortunately, his lack of intelligence kept him from finishing the fight. Instead, he climbed on top of the creature and demanded praise for his magic. Predictably, the giant broke free and hurled him to the ground. Just as the monster was about to crush him, Tanakapali intervened, pinning it to a rock with a combination of grass and earth magic. She then smacked Pipe on the head, scolding him for his reckless behavior. As the only young staff bearer, the lives of many could one day depend on his actions, yet he failed to understand the weight of his responsibility. If Dragon continues to suffer these giant attacks, the nation may face destruction. The only lead they have is a rumor about a calamity appearing in the Cursed Lands. Determined to investigate, Tanakapali had forced Pipe to accompany her, hoping to instill some responsibility in him. Now, however, she regrets bringing him along, as one wrong move could cost them their lives. Suddenly, Pipe blurts out an offer of friendship to Takuto, shocking everyone. Tanakapali panics, fearing such brazen familiarity with the king could warrant execution. She apologizes profusely and tries to excuse his behavior. To her astonishment, Takuto welcomes the gesture warmly, saying he would love to be friends with Pipe. A feast is held to welcome Tanakapali's group. Maria and Karya serve drinks, offering glasses of apple juice. Tanakapali takes a sip and is astonished. It is the most delicious thing she has ever tasted, and even the quality of the glassware surpasses the craftsmanship of the finest artisans on the continent. Pipe, equally impressed, eagerly asks Maria for a refill. Before his drink even arrives, he jumps up and starts complimenting Gia on his impressive muscles. After the feast, Pipe begins showing off his magic to Moltar, and surprisingly, everyone lets him do as he pleases, mostly because Takuto seems to enjoy his company. Takudo is impressed by how sociable Pipe is, regardless of the situation, and he is glad they've become friends. However, since Takudo has never actually had a friend before, he isn't sure what friendship truly entails. While Pipe is busy being scolded by Tanukapali, Tutoria approaches Takudo and asks if he'd like to play a game. The room falls silent at the unexpected request, leaving Takudo feeling awkward. But when Pipe cheerfully agrees, the tension eases and the two sit down to play together. The first game is a simple one invented by Pipe. Each takes a blade of grass, and they pull them against each other to see whose grass breaks first. Tanukapali worries that Takudo might find such a trivial game insulting, but he ends up having a great time. They continue playing for a while, and later Pipe tries out several games designed by Takudo. He thoroughly enjoys them, and even suggests that Takudo could sell these games in Dragon. Before he can say more, Tanukapali cuts him off, reminding him that it isn't his place to make such decisions. Still, Takudo is pleased Pipe mentioned trade, since he already intends to establish relations with Dragon. Yet, he also knows he must set aside his personal friendship with Pipe and act as a ruler during negotiations. Once the meal is finished, Ira, sometimes referred to as Atau, questions Tanukapali about the purpose of her journey. Uneasy, she explains that her country has been under constant attack by barbarians. Ira is surprised, as barbarians usually avoid large cities. Tanukapali clarifies that this unusual aggression is exactly why she came to investigate. Takudo then asks whether this means Dragon lacks the military strength to deal with the threat. The question causes Tanukapali to panic inwardly. If Takudo learns how dire their situation truly is, Manora might attempt conquest instead of alliance. She lies, claiming Dragon still has the strength to repel the barbarians, but the strange nature of their attacks warranted an investigation. Her explanation manages to convince everyone that Dragon can still hold its ground. Unfortunately, Pipe blurts out that earlier, Tanukapali told him their country would be doomed if they couldn't uncover the reason behind the barbarians' assault. This slip embarrasses her, but Takudo and Ira reassure her that Manora has no intention of conquering other nations, as their focus is currently on domestic stability. Still, they cannot ignore the problem. If Dragon falls, Manora would likely be next. Shocked, Tanukapali asks if this means Manora will aid them. She admits that because of their overextension in building a town near the Dragon Vein, Dragon is vulnerable and may not endure much longer. Ira then turns to Takudo, asking his opinion. Takudo answers that since Pipe is his friend, he will offer as much aid as necessary. Overjoyed, Tanukapali asks what Manora wants in return. Ira casually responds that they seek rights to the Dragon Vein, a request that makes Tanukapali uneasy. Still, she has no choice but to accept. Ira assures her that they are content with sharing control of the vein with Dragon, only reserving the exclusive right to determine elemental conversions. This revelation shocks Tanukapali. Manora already possesses technology to convert pure mana into elemental energy, something Dragon would not have developed for another decade. It becomes clear to her that Manora is vastly more advanced, making an alliance even more beneficial. By tradition, however, the decision falls to Pipe as the youngest staff bearer and future leader. Despite his foolishness, he has a natural gift for judging people. When asked, Pipe declares that he wants to be friends with everyone in Manora, sealing the alliance between the two nations. Later, Ira convenes a meeting to discuss the agreement. Manora will provide consumable goods to Dragon, while Dragon will supply metal products and daily necessities. Moltar is pleased with the deal, as until now they had relied solely on Takudo for such resources. But their greatest gain is access to the Dragon Vein, thanks in no small part to Pipe's reckless honesty. Had he not revealed Dragon's desperate state, Tanukapali would have kept her facade of confidence, and meaningful negotiations might never have happened. In that case, Dragon might have been destroyed before Manora could intervene. This leaves Takudo wondering, is Pipe truly an idiot, or was his clumsy behavior secretly calculated to secure the best possible outcome? As the meeting wraps up, the group considers how to manage relations with Dragon moving forward. Maria and Karya admit that, despite the negotiations, none of them know much about Dragon's culture or values, an essential aspect of sustaining an alliance. In the game, Takudo only ever had to click a button to establish friendly relations, so it never occurred to him that he'd have to actively work to maintain an alliance in reality. Since they still know very little about Dragon Isla, Atao suggests that their first step should be to investigate its capital, Crescent Moon. However, because the city is far from Manora, such an investigation would take a long time. Takudo decides to put that aside for now, saying their top priority should be helping Dragon fight off the giants. But Moltar points out that visiting another nation isn't something they can do impulsively, as proper diplomatic protocol must be observed. At that moment, Maria and Karia raise their hands and suggest going under the pretense of simply playing. As childish as it sounds, the idea has merit. If they present the trip as an informal greeting before sending an official delegation, they could depart right away. Moltar volunteers to go, but Takudo declines. To another nation, Moltar would appear as Manora's highest-ranking magical chancellor, making him too important to serve as a casual messenger. The same reasoning applies to Gia and Emil, whose positions are equally critical. What they need is someone Takudo trusts, but who isn't considered too high-ranking. Once again, Maria and Karia volunteer. Takudo immediately refuses, concerned for their safety. Ira, Atao, offers to go instead, but Moltar reminds her that she is Takudo's closest confidant, arguably the most important person besides him, so sending her would also be unwise. At that moment, Maria and Karia approach Takudo directly. They remind him that he once promised to give them the freedom to make their own choices. Right now, they want to support him, even if it means facing danger. Though reluctant, Takudo can't bring himself to say no when faced with their earnest expressions. He finally agrees, while Ira, Atao, grows jealous that Takudo yielded so easily to someone else's charm. Emily voices concerns about the two going alone, but Takudo reassures everyone that he already has reliable bodyguards in mind. Later, he retreats to his throne room, still troubled by Ira's sulking. Unsure of what to do, he consults Maria, who advises him to be honest about his feelings. Taking her advice, Takudo approaches Ira, apologizes for making her uneasy, and reassures her that she doesn't need to worry about being replaced. He expresses his gratitude for everything she does, for always staying by his side, and tells her there's no one he'd rather be with. That's all Ira needed to hear. Instantly, her mood shifts, and she even starts daydreaming about a happily married life with Takudo. Though he has no idea what she's imagining, he's just glad she's no longer upset. Not long after, Takudo brings Maria, Karia, and Ira to the clinic. At first, they're confused. None of them are sick. But Takudo explains that the clinic was cheap to build, so he constructed it on a whim. Since Maria and Karia will soon be departing on a mission, he decided to assign the newly created plague doctors as their personal bodyguards. Takudo introduces the plague doctors to everyone and informs Maria and Karia that these medics are not only capable of treating injuries and diseases, but also of fighting to protect them during their journey. Ira Atao then steps forward and formally assigns the medics to guard Maria and Karia, while also instructing them to observe and learn as much about local culture as possible during their stay in Dragon. The medics are thrilled by the mission, eagerly promising to blend in with the humans and study their ways. Amused by their enthusiasm, Takudo rewards them early by giving them proper names: Ichiro, Jiro, and Saburo. Overjoyed with their new identities, the three thank him excessively, though their boundless excitement makes both Takudo and Ira question whether sending them as guards is truly wise. Karia seems unimpressed by them, but Maria enjoys their antics, finding them entertaining. Meanwhile, in Dragon, the mayor, an elf named Antic, is having a meltdown after being buried under paperwork for an entire week. She had taken this position believing it would free her from the strict traditions of elven society, and perhaps even allow her to find a husband. Instead, she now suffers from back pain, endless desk work, and a growing drinking problem. To make matters worse, she has recently been informed that she must cooperate with the forces of darkness to protect the city, though she has no idea what that even means. Just then, Antic's assistant knocks on her office door, startling her. Irritated, she snaps at the assistant to go away, but quickly realizes she's being too harsh. Correcting her tone, she politely asks what the matter is. Her assistant explains that some visitors have arrived to meet her. Assuming they lack an appointment, Antic orders her assistant to dismiss them. However, upon hearing that the visitors are emissaries from Manora, her attitude changes instantly. She hurries to prepare tea before going to greet them. When Antic enters the meeting room, she introduces herself as the mayor of Dragon and warmly welcomes Maria and Karia. However, she's caught off guard by the three shadowy figures standing behind them. The sight unsettles her, and she wonders what Tanu Kapali was thinking when she agreed to an alliance with people like this. Nevertheless, it is her responsibility to deal with them properly, so she thanks the emissaries for making the long journey. Maria and Karia politely introduce themselves as emissaries of Manora, earning Antic's praise for their courtesy. Internally, however, Antic notes that they are dark elves. Suspicion gnaws at her as she assumes the three figures behind them are assassins, but she hides her concerns and maintains a friendly demeanor. She apologizes for not having prepared a proper welcome ceremony, explaining she didn't know of their arrival. The twins assure her they don't mind. Then, Antic remembers that Tanu Kapali once mentioned twin dark elves who were being trained by the king to become leaders of Manora. Realizing these are the very twins before her, she panics slightly. If she were to offend them, it could jeopardize relations between Dragon and Manora. Nervously, she asks about the purpose of their visit. Since there isn't an official reason, Karia hesitates, unsure what to say. At that moment, Jiro steps forward and explains that they are there in response to Pepe's invitation to come and play. He clarifies that this trip should be regarded as two students visiting to learn about local culture, not an official diplomatic mission. Relieved, Antic realizes this means she won't need to begin formal negotiations about the alliance just yet. If the twins are here only as tourists, her burden is much lighter, though she still knows she must tread carefully to avoid offending them. Smiling, she tells Maria and Karia that they are welcome to stay as long as they like, even offering them a personal tour of the city. Maria and Karia ask if it is truly alright for the mayor to guide them herself, and Antic cheerfully assures them that she knows every corner of the city, making her the perfect guide. In truth, she wants to make a strong impression on the twins to strengthen Dragon's relationship with Manora, and this also provides her with a perfect excuse to escape her dreaded paperwork. There's no way she would pass up such an opportunity. The group spends the day touring the city, with Antic proudly showing Maria and Karia around. The atmosphere is light and enjoyable, and the twins seem to be having fun. Meanwhile, back in Manora, Takudo is buried under a mountain of paperwork of his own, but he makes sure to monitor how things are going with Maria and Karia. He is relieved and glad to see that they are enjoying themselves. That evening, Antic bids farewell to her guests, and once Maria and Karia return to their room, they begin reviewing the day's events. Karia asks her sister what she thinks of the city so far. Maria replies that the townspeople seemed anxious, carrying a sense of unease, complaints of food shortages, rumors of an impending enemy attack, and hope that the gnome would soon arrive to help. The plague doctors are surprised by how much information Maria managed to gather, since they hadn't seen her speaking with anyone directly. But Maria explains that she is simply skilled at reading people's emotions, and her judgments are rarely wrong. The medics are impressed. They hadn't realized she possessed such insight. At that moment, Jiro hands Maria a small bag she had asked for earlier. She pulls out a plant and explains that it is popple grass, a powerful narcotic that is banned in nearly every nation. Jiro sheepishly admits he had purchased it from a shady vendor in a back alley, not realizing what it was at the time. Alarmed, he scolds Maria, warning her that drugs are dangerous and she should dispose of it immediately. What concerns them most, however, is how easily the substance was obtained despite its prohibition. The group quickly concludes that someone within the city must be cultivating and distributing popple grass, which is highly dangerous. Karia is troubled, remarking how terrible it is for people to be doing such things when Antic is working so hard to maintain the city. Saburo adds that with criminal activity present, they will need to be even more vigilant in protecting the twins, as there is no telling what else could happen. The next day, the medics escort Maria and Karia to see the dragon vein, where they marvel at the breathtaking crystals glittering throughout the mine. But then, a man named Vesta approaches them and casually mentions that popple grass grows exceptionally well in this area. Remaining polite but firm, Karia greets Vesta and asks him to get straight to the point. Vesta introduces himself and reveals that he has heard they are emissaries of Manora. He adds that he believes this land will soon be jointly governed by Dragon and Manora, and therefore he wishes to propose a business arrangement. His offer is simple: a partnership with the twins in cultivating popple grass. Intrigued, Karya decides to see how far he will take this. She calmly asks what benefits Manora would receive should they choose to cooperate with him. Vesta explains that popple grass sells for a high price in the market, so naturally Manora would receive a share of the profits. However, he also hints at other offerings he could provide. Karya presses him to specify what kind of offerings he means, but Vesta insists that such matters are too illegal to discuss in public. Instead, he hands Karya a map pointing to a secluded location where they could continue their conversation privately. Though hesitant at first, Karya eventually accepts the map. Vesta grins, saying he always enjoys working with those of evil alignment because they tend to understand him. He complains that the current mayor of the city enforces foolish policies, like banning drug sales or prohibiting human trafficking. But once the king of Manor takes control, he believes leadership will be far more sympathetic to his business practices. A few days later, Maria and Karya meet with Antic again. Since they will be leaving town soon, Antic warmly thanks them for their visit, saying it has been wonderful getting to know the twins. The sisters thank her in return for being such a gracious host and ask if there's anything they can do for her. Antic replies that she would be grateful if they spoke well of her the next time they met with King Takudo, and the twins agree without hesitation. Suddenly, the door bursts open and Vesta barges in with two thugs at his side. Outraged, Antic shouts that he has no right to enter without permission, but Vesta casually reminds her that he never cared about rules to begin with. He announces that he has come to hear the twins' answer to the business proposal, since they never attended the private meeting he had arranged. Maria calmly asks if he is referring to his offer of selling popple grass together. Hearing this, Antic begins to panic. She had no idea Vesta had approached the twins, and fears that if Manor were to ally with him, her city would be destroyed. But Maria, sensing her worry, reassures her. Neither she nor Karya would ever consider working with a scumbag like Vesta. Their refusal to attend his meeting should have been more than enough for him to realize they were not interested. Karya then turns to Antic and respectfully asks if she may handle Vesta herself. Though she would normally avoid interfering in another city's affairs, she fears letting him go unchecked could cause greater harm, and they would hate to spark an international incident by acting without permission. Antic, however, is quick to grant her approval, explaining that Vesta has been a constant nuisance to the people of the city. At Maria and Karya's signal, the plague doctors step forward to confront Vesta. Yet, instead of looking worried, Vesta appears strangely confident. He reveals a small vial in his possession, a concentrated extract of the popple flower. He boasts that a single dose is enough to enslave anyone, reducing them to a mindless addict. Maria and Karya immediately recognize his intent. He plans to use the drug against them. Calmly but firmly, they ask him if he has truly thought this through. Though they may appear to be just two young girls, laying a hand on them would make him the enemy of the entire kingdom of Manora. Surely, King Takudo would not take kindly to such an insult. But in his arrogance, Vesta believes he can blackmail the king by enslaving the twins as his personal property. What he fails to consider, however, is the presence of the three loyal guardians standing directly in front of him. Vesta hands the vial of siren extract to his goons and orders them to seize the twins. But before they can even take a step forward, a sword suddenly goes flying across the room and lodges itself into the wall just inches from Vesta's head. He turns horrified, only to witness the gruesome fate his men have suffered. Meanwhile, back in Manora, Takudo enjoys a quiet cup of tea with Ao, feeling quite pleased with himself. He reflects on how wise it was to create those medics, as they have proven invaluable in protecting the twins. Curious, Emil asks why Takudo chose to send medics instead of simply dispatching a squad of trained warriors with Maria and Karya. Ao explains that the three plague doctors have an unusual fascination with humans and demi-humans. They love studying human biology, and while their knowledge makes them excellent healers, their obsession has a much darker side, because sometimes they also eat brains. That duality makes them absolutely terrifying when they decide to unleash their true nature. Back in Dragon, the medics have just finished dismembering Vesta's goons with surgical precision. Now, in an almost childlike display of glee, they dance around the office holding up the flayed skins, delighted to add them to their growing collection. The sight causes Antic to collapse to her knees in sheer horror. But before she can fully break down, Maria approaches and gently comforts her, offering a calm presence amidst the nightmare. As for Vesta, his end is far from comforting. Trembling, he falls to the floor and begs for mercy. But Karya steps forward coldly, her voice steady with righteous fury. She tells him he has already gone too far. She had been willing to overlook his drug trafficking since it wasn't her concern. But by daring to threaten her and her sister, and worse, by insulting her glorious king, Takudo, he sealed his fate. With a commanding tone, Karia orders the medics to kill him. They obey without hesitation. Minutes later, the three plague doctors are parading around the office, proudly cosplaying in Vesta's skin as though it were just another trophy. Antic is left speechless, her mind struggling to process the surreal horror she has just witnessed. Karia turns to her politely and apologizes for making such a mess in her office. She even asks if she should cover the cleaning bill. Shaking nervously, Antic insists it's not necessary. When Karia smiles warmly in gratitude, Antic realizes that expression is somehow even more terrifying than the sight of the medics wearing their grisly new suits. In that moment, she can't help but regret ever becoming the mayor of this city. But whether she likes it or not, this is her life now, and she'll just have to get used to it. Antic's frightened expression quickly fades as she actually finds the situation somewhat funny. A few days later, the twins return from their journey. Upon their arrival, Atao is seen scolding Takudo for giving them too much freedom during the mission. She is furious that Takudo abandoned his pile of work just to monitor the twins through the eyes of the medics. Takudo defends himself, saying he only did it because he didn't want to be too strict and make the twins hate him. That excuse only fuels Atao's anger. She reminds him that it is not his place to pamper the girls to that extent, since he is their king, not their father. Atao then turns her anger toward the twins, demanding to know why they conspired with King Takudo behind her back. After that, she directs her scolding at the medics, calling them out for skinning a human alive right in front of the mayor. The medics, however, show no remorse, claiming that such actions bring them one step closer to becoming human themselves. Hearing that, Atao explodes and screams at them to shut up. Following this, everyone, including King Takudo, kneels before her as she orders them to reflect on the poor decisions they made. Takudo admits that the medics may have been a bad influence on Maria and Karia, since they were the ones who gave the order to kill in front of the mayor. Atao continues her lecture, saying this is exactly what happens when they are sent on missions without proper supervision. She then declares that none of them are to move until they finish writing statements acknowledging they understand the consequences of their actions. Hearing this, everyone just sighs in defeat. A few hours later, they gather for a meeting to discuss what should be done about Dragon. However, Takudo interrupts by handing candy to Maria and Karia, which causes Atao to snap again, shouting that they must not feel any regret at all. But Gia and the other dark elves redirect her focus, saying they understand her anger but believe the meeting should take priority. Realizing the sense in their words, Atao calms down and tells them to continue. Moltar then speaks up, asking the twins if their investigation in Dragon went exactly as written in the report. Karia confirms, adding that King Takudo himself reviewed it, so she is certain it's accurate. Moltar looks it over and concludes that the city seems very unstable. Emily joins in, saying Dragon lacks the resources to maintain proper order, which is why crime has been on the rise. From her perspective, it's only a matter of time before the city suffers a major disruption. Atao reviews the report as well and notes that, on top of everything, Dragon is also facing outside attacks from barbarians. According to the report, the city is dealing with monsters such as goblins, orcs, and hill giants. Gia says the goblins and orcs aren't much of a problem, but the real issue lies with the hill giants. They've started appearing in groups near the city, and worse, their numbers seem to be steadily increasing every day. Atao asks what they mean by suddenly appear, but Moltar explains that the monsters don't literally materialize out of nowhere. It only seems that way to Dragon's people because of their weak detection abilities. Beastmen are known for their sharp senses when it comes to detecting approaching enemies, but Moltar guesses the ones in Dragon aren't putting their abilities to use, likely because they're exhausted. Gia concludes that no matter how you look at it, Dragon is on the verge of collapse. Because of this, he suggests dispatching a large force as quickly as possible to support the city. Emily agrees with Gia's suggestion, but points out that splitting their forces would leave them short on manpower for important tasks like construction and farming. In response, Gia suggests sending most of their warriors instead, but before Emily can share her thoughts, Atao interrupts, declaring that no matter who they choose to dispatch, she herself will also be going. Moltar hears this and assumes it's because of her ability to steal skills. Atao confirms, saying that if she goes to the battlefield, she should be able to acquire some very useful abilities. King Takudo agrees, adding that it would also be a good chance for Atao to grow stronger, which is why he had already planned to send her with the troops. Moltar responds by saying that if that's the case, he should be entrusted with providing the retinue. Atao agrees, confident she can trust Moltar with the negotiations and coordination. Still, she stresses the need for more men on the ground. Hearing that, Moltar suggests bringing some of his apprentices along, since they're skilled enough to handle routine attacks. Atao is pleased with the idea. However, Emily remains concerned, noting that until now their national defense has depended heavily on Atao's presence. Hearing this, Jia clenches his teeth and admits he can't deny it. Takudo then speaks up, saying he's aware of the issue, which is why they'll be creating a new hero, Isla, the new cornerstone of their defense. Everyone is shocked at the announcement. Moltar rises to commend King Takudo, calling it another brilliant decision. Emily agrees, saying Takudo must truly be wise to have anticipated the situation back when he first began production. Takudo admits that while the timing worked out perfectly, it wasn't the result of some master plan, it just happened by chance. The elves bow and respect at his honesty, but in that moment, Takudo realizes that as a king, sometimes pretending to be almighty is still necessary. Even so, he knows he made the right choice in allowing the Dark Elves to participate in these meetings. His current life is nothing like his past, when he had to carry the weight of every decision alone. Atao asks if he has anything more to add, and Takudo stands to declare that everything is perfect, just as they decided. The Dark Elves feel honored to receive praise from their king, and promise they will not let him down. A few hours later, everyone gathers outside, and Atao is especially excited. They're finally about to create the new hero. Takudo shares her excitement, admitting that although they had to ration heavily to secure the resources, it was completely worth it. Karia asks Takudo what kind of person the summoned hero will be. Takudo admits he has no idea, saying it will be a surprise he's looking forward to. After that, Takudo and Atao begin speaking telepathically. Takudo asks her what will happen with Isla. Atao replies that since Isla will be the very first hero they've summoned since arriving in this world, there's no way to predict her nature. She adds that if Isla rebels and tries to attack, she will protect Takudo with her life. As Takudo begins the summoning process, he continues telepathically, telling Atao not to risk her life. If Takudo were to lose her, he wouldn't be able to resummon her. A purple cloud forms and condenses into a cocoon, out of which Isla emerges. Atao isn't sure how Isla will react, though she believes the chances of hostility are slim. Isla appears in the form of a giant mantis, and the moment she rises, she unleashes a deafening roar, forcing Takudo and the others to keep their guard up. But then, Isla walks straight to Takudo and acknowledges him as her king. Thanking him for summoning her, she says she's overjoyed to serve Takudo once again. Excited, Takudo asks if she actually remembers him. Isla confirms, even calling him by name to prove it. Atao steps forward, demanding Isla vow to serve Takudo without rebellion. Isla simply pats Atao's head in a playful manner, saying she doesn't need to be so serious. Of course, she vows to serve King Takudo. She adds that the time she spent with him before arriving in this world has been etched into her very being. Hearing this is proof enough that Isla remembers him from before. She explains there's no way she could ever forget him, since he was the only one capable of drawing out her full power. After that, she asks Takudo to explain the current situation. Takudo takes her into the palace and gives her a full breakdown of everything that's happened. He admits there's still much she doesn't understand, but thanks to Atao, he's managed to get by. Atao blushes, saying she's only here because of him anyway. With that, Isla says she understands her role is to protect their nation. Takudo confirms, telling her she's their defense hero, while the attack hero will be the one to destroy the barbarians and dragon. Atao knows going on the mission is the best call, but she can't help feeling sad about leaving him. Takudo admits he'll miss her too, but reminds her she's the best one for the job. Realizing this will be their first time apart since arriving in this world, they hug tightly, confessing how much they'll miss each other. Meanwhile, Isla simply watches them and remarks that she should probably give them some privacy. The next day, Atao waves goodbye to Takudo and the others as she heads off to Dragon with the warriors. After she leaves, Isla finally speaks up, saying it's about time she got to work. She bows respectfully and tells Takudo to leave everything to her. A few hours later, Isla notices Takudo isn't as sharp sharp as usual without Atao around. Earlier, she even caught him sleeping, so she asks what has him so tired. The twins chime in, explaining that Takudo always sleeps in until noon, even when he hasn't done anything tiring the day before. Isla sighs and teases him, saying he's acting like a baby standing in front of her. She reminds him he's the leader of a great nation. If his people ever found out he slept until noon and had to be woken up, what would they think? She tells him to start waking up early from now on. Takudo just nods and says he'll try his best. Karia comments that Isla is really different from Atao, since Atao always let Takudo do whatever he wanted. Isla ignores the remark and instead asks to borrow the twins for a while. She wants them to show her around since she's still unfamiliar with Manora's main facilities. Takudo assumes Isla wants to see things firsthand instead of just reading a map, so she can form a clearer picture of the nation. With that in mind, he agrees, and the twins eagerly scurry off with Isla to give her the tour. Just then, Emily walks over to Takudo with a revised report, asking for his approval. As Takudo accepts it, he realizes this might actually be the first time he's spoken to someone alone without Atao. After looking it over, he tells her the report is solid, but he wants some changes. Starting next week, he wants her to reduce the manpower in gathering and redirect it elsewhere. Emily bows and says she'll follow his orders immediately. Gia then walks in, asking for his approval on their report. Takudo just rolls his eyes, realizing it's going to be a very long day. Meanwhile, as the twins guide Isla through the facilities, she asks them to explain everything they know about the place. Just as they begin, they bump into Emily, who's clearly upset. She complains that Gia has broken their training equipment again. It's been frustrating having to scrape together the budget to replace things each time. Isla just pats Emily's head and promises to scold Gia later. Judging by Emily's expression, she's definitely enjoying the head pats. At the training ground, Gia is once again showing off his strength, breaking everyone's weapons in a single slash. He turns on his team, scolding them for their sloppy form, saying they'll never be able to protect Manora at this rate. That's when Isla suddenly appears behind him. She tells him to think twice before destroying the equipment. Gia apologizes and tries to explain himself, but Isla simply pats his head and says that forgetting himself so quickly just proves he's still a child. Embarrassed, Gia politely asks her to stop patting him, since it makes him look less intimidating in front of his soldiers. Suddenly, a loud banging sound echoes nearby. Isla stays alert and asks what it is, but the twins quickly run over to tell her it's just the signal for dinner. They all head to the dining area, where the dark elves are already gathered and eating. Some of them bring out a table and fine dishware for Isla to use since she outranks them, but she refuses. Instead, she sits on the floor and says she'll use the same dishware as everyone else. As a defense hero, she believes she can only do her job properly if she shares the same perspective as the people. Maria and Karia are moved by this. They run off for a bit and return with a special wooden plate they made themselves, offering it as a gift. Isla finds the gesture adorable, so she hugs them both and gives them head pats. The girls admit they were starting to feel jealous seeing everyone else get pats while they didn't. Later that night, Isla is on patrol when she hears someone crying. She goes to the door and finds Karia crying, with Maria trying to comfort her. Maria explains that Karia woke up from a bad dream. Isla praises Maria for being such a good big sister, then asks for details. The twins confess they often dream of their mother. Karia knows there's nothing she can do about what happened, but sometimes she can't help reliving those painful memories. Still, they reassure Isla not to worry, saying those dreams happen much less often now. Tonight was the first time in a long while. Isla gently comes up with an idea. From now on, she'll sleep beside them. That way, when they wake up, she'll be right there, and they won't have to be scared. She embraces them warmly, promising that she'll always be there for them. The next day, Isla reports to Takudo. After discussing with Emily, she recommends building a learning institute as their next project. Takudo agrees, adding that after that, they'll construct the living reeds. Isla notes that the forest terrain already gives the dark elves an advantage, and the cursed land strengthens all evil beings. Takudo agrees, saying that since they're not at war, there's no need to rush strengthening their defenses. Finally, Isla asks how things are going with Atao. Takudo smirks, saying she seems to be in a rather amusing situation. Using telepathy, he peers through Atao's eyes and sees she's just about to slaughter the barbarians.